Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, once again, I've got a video inspired by my friend Eloy, the Umbramancer, the reader of shadows. It was one of those things that he was talking about to Anthony and I, actually. And one of the things we've done as a group of gamers or game enthusiasts is we've kind of split up into various little Facebook Messenger chats based upon interest and whatnot. And that's actually a really healthy thing to do. When you have a big group of friends, we don't all want to talk about the same things or all agree about the same things or whatever. You find the same things interesting, etc. So we have many splinter groups, which is actually really kind of cool, but gives me a lot of things to respond to. Anyhow, this video isn't about that social dynamic. It's about something that he talked about, and the more I thought about it, the more I related to it. Now, our friend Anthony is trained in combat. He's taken a lot of martial arts and swords and all that kind of stuff, and apparently can kick my butt if he wants to. And I'm glad he doesn't want to. He's very far away, so I can run fast, Anthony. But Eloy and I, we don't know anything about real, actual combat. Pretty much zilch. So Eloy was mentioning the idea that while we, very often try to have an in-person, in-character as character sort of experience. That's one of the things that we try to gravitate towards. And imagining things, from the perspective of the character themselves. He mentioned that when it comes down to things like combat, very often he switches into more of a third-person view where he's kind of watching the character fight, because it's hard for him to imagine what it would actually be like. And I found that really kind of interesting. I had to think about my own experiences with that in various games, because one of the things that we talk about with terms that are imperfect, terms like prairie dogging or porpoising or what have you, is this idea that we're switching states from time to time during a game. We're having this in-character, as character experience, and then we're kind of switching out to more of a third-person state. Maybe we're dealing with the mechanics, maybe we're dealing with the other people at the table and just having a social moment or whatever. But this is one of those moments where that seems to happen for some of us. And I started to think, my friend Anthony, on the other hand, I imagine doesn't have as many of those disconnect moments because he knows exactly what that kind of stuff is like. When we play All for One Regime Diabolique, he's able to imagine and describe sword techniques, which just, I don't know. It's like, yeah, you do this, and you hit the guy, you don't hit the guy, and you knock his blade away, but I don't have as much personal experience with that. And so I'm thinking about my own experiences, with combat in games or other things that my characters are doing that I have less of an ability to imagine what they'd be like. And it really seems to have depended upon the game. Very often, Eloy has talked about hearing the music when we play Star Wars. And I've had that happen with other pulpy games where you can kind of you definitely hear the music. When things are all firing on all cylinders, there's that thing where you're kind of recreating the feel of a Star Wars action scene or, a Pulp Heroics action scene. And you can kind of almost hear that music in the background. And very often when that happens, I'm kind of panning back a little bit. I'm imagining, Mr. Garibaldi, in our The Sky Is No Limit campaign of Hollow Earth Expedition, or Leagues of Adventure, rather. And there's those moments where I kind of pull back a little bit. I'm not imagining things from through his eyes as much for that moment. And it's varied from game to game. Sometimes in All for One, it's been one or the other. Certainly in Circle of Hands, it was very. I really saw through the character's eyes, whichever character I happened to be playing in that particular moment. In Alien, very often it was through the character's eyes, but not always. Occasionally, it pulled back a little bit. But I think some of the way the combats were described made it much easier to be in Leo Baxter's head. The entire time. I'm not saying, one way is bad or better than the other. I just found it kind of interesting that there's that, we can have this entire game where we're really kind of focused from the character lens, and then all of a sudden we get to something like combat, where all of a sudden we sort of pull back in our imagination. I found that really kind of fascinating. It's really interesting what happens to us or how we have the experience when we have the role-playing game. And sometimes I don't even think about a distinction like that until a friend mentions something, and I'm like, that's interesting. I have to think about that and watch myself a little bit more. What about you?